I'm leaving for Australia on Tuesday afternoon. I started in 2004 attending a bicycle ride there, and it's put on by, um, sponsored by the government actually. It's a Great Victorian Bike Ride. We have between 3,000 and 5,000 people on the ride. It's very highly organized, and it's a wonderful experience, and so I'm going to go as long as I can and can't wait to get going. So today is our 9th session, which really is dealing with planning. It's really a session about planning everything. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to speak for the first 10 minutes on a few essentials of planning, and then Neil, who is a member of the church and a professional financial planner, is going to give us some help on dealing with one aspect that I'm not really good with, and that is finances, and he's an expert. How do we handle our financial resources when we're looking at death? So the first thing in planning, and I don't have a handout because it's really what Neil has a handout, but I don't have one because I just wanted to mention a few things. 5 things I want to mention. The first thing that we have to plan for, and you can take notes on the back of his if you want, is I think that it's important as we age to plan for if we're in that position, if we have a partner, planning for the loss of our partner. Now, generally speaking, you would think, well, if 2 people are together, you have 50% chance that one of them will die and the other one would outlive. But in reality, if it's male and female, the male has 10 times greater chance of dying than the female, and that's why there's so many widows. But how do you plan to avoid a broken heart? And having suffered a broken heart, I think that not in the loss of my wife, who is still alive, but my father when I was 14, I think the important thing for us at this stage of life is to look at and to focus on the fact that we were together for so long. Now, my wife and I are fortunate. Last June we celebrated our 59th wedding anniversary. So you see, that's a whole lifetime together. And so what I'm focusing on, and I'm sure she as well, we're focusing on the fact that we've been together so long and what a great blessing that's been. And in fact, I can tell you that it's been a gift, that our being together is really a gift. And so I have to be thankful for having received that gift. And in my gratitude, I have to use my gratitude through my tears when we finally say goodbye, because one of us will precede the other. So that's how you try to avoid a broken heart. I have seen on a number of occasions working in hospice where long-term married people die quickly of a broken heart. We had one lady, they were married 68 years, and her name was Easter because she was born on Easter, a wonderful Christian lady, and she died. And she was on hospice for like 5 months, and he was just fine. And within 2 weeks, he was on hospice and died a month after she did. And he died of a broken heart. So how do you avoid that? I think it's through gratitude, trying to focus on the gratitude. So then the second area is we have to decide about ashes or burial. What do we want for ourselves? That's a decision that we can make. But we have to take into account, I think, our family's wishes too, because it's up to them to deal with our loss. And so my wife is deadly opposed to cremation, and I want to be cremated. And statistics say that 9 out of 10, she'll have the last word. But you never know. So that's a decision that you have to wrestle with. Burial, the advantage of burial is that it gives a place to go and grieve if there are survivors who are going to go. And then the third area is advanced arrangements. Think about that, going to a mortuary and actually setting up an account and actually making decisions. When my father died at 43, my mother was 39, and she suddenly was at the mortuary making funeral plans, unprepared, had no idea, trying to make these decisions. Did she want this or did she want that? And how could she possibly decide in that situation? And of course, at 43, my father had made no funeral arrangements. He was a healthy man, as far as he knew. But in fact, he was very ill, died of a massive heart attack. And then the fourth area is a will. It's really nice to leave a will, because if you don't leave a will, the state will. The state will come in and take over. And I mean, it's not pleasant. They order you around. For 33 years, we rented our little guest house behind our big house to a gentleman, and he became family to us after 33 years. And I kept saying to him, Jim, we're getting older. Have you made any arrangements? Do you have a will? What do we do if you should die? What do we do? Oh, just call the VA. They have all those details. VA had nothing. They didn't even have a Social Security number. I gave that to them. And because we were renting to him, the state of California said that we were responsible for his estate. And in fact, we had to go through his things. And if there was anything worth more than $700, we had to hire at our own personal expense a licensed auctioneer to auction it off at the highest bidder, and we had to take all of the proceeds and send it to the state, because we became agents of the state. And that's what the state says. If you don't leave a will, that's what you're putting on people if you don't have any family. So wills are really important, and the wonderful thing about a will is it's so easy. The strongest will you could have is a holographic will, and that's one that you write out in your own handwriting. Just sit down and write it out and sign it. It's a holographic will, and that really carries weight, and that'll set the stage for what happens with your things. And then the last thing is, if you have any real estate or assets, financial assets, those need to be in a trust for your survivors, assuming you have survivors. Because then your assets, whatever they are, can pass seamlessly to them without probate, without a 2-year waiting period where you pay great legal expenses to have everything gone through, which you don't need to have done if you're passing it on. And so for, I think it was like $500 or something, we had an attorney draw up the papers. It was a huge legal undertaking, and we got a whole 2 books on it of papers all together, bound together, of all of the trust deeds from the property we own and everything, and it goes right to our daughters. So when we die, they step right in, and all of those assets go to them. There's no taxes, no fees, no attorneys, no endless waiting for the court to decide something. And so now I want to introduce Neil, and at the conclusion of his presentation, we have time for you to ask questions. Neil?
Craig, thank you. And he scared you a little bit, which is good. I'm not going to scare you. But I also recognize in our half an hour together, I'm not going to make you an expert in personal finances, but what I hope to do, truthfully, is inspire you a little bit to take some action, some of the things of which Craig already brought up, and I'm going to echo. So I'm going to share some stories. We're going to talk about 3 things. The first is endowments, why they exist, how to help grow them. Second is a little tax tip. And thirdly, we'll talk about trusts and avoiding probate. Okay, those are the three things we're going to cover. So the first idea is why have an endowment at all? So instead of talking about endowments, I want to talk about giving or saving. So go back with me in your mind to when you were out of high school, maybe brand new in college. The idea of saving was it was hand to mouth, right? Saving was something I'll worry about tomorrow. I just need to put food on the table and gas in the car, and saving is something I'll worry about later. But then you get later in your 20s, maybe you have a job, maybe you're saving for a house or something, and so you do start saving. And then somewhere later on you say, you know what, I don't want to work my whole life. I better put money in an account to live off of in retirement. And so you set up an IRA or 401k or investments or pay off the house, etc. So that idea of saving for today, saving for tomorrow, saving for forever, let's change the word saving to giving. Today giving, tomorrow giving, forever giving. Think about this church. You give to the church your tithe so that we can pay the bills. That's today giving. You give to the church so that we can have some money excess to repair the roof or right? But it's really nice if we had a forever account. And we do at this church. We have about a $1.3 million endowment, no different than the apartments, that generate revenue to help pay our bills. And so endowments, if you look here in Redlands, look at any organization more than 100 years old, the university, the hospital, the YMCA, the church across the street. Do they have an endowment? Yes, because someone once upon a time had the vision and the discipline to say, let's put some money in an account for forever. And that forever account, that endowment that we have, is what we're borrowing from to do the light and the sound, and then we're asking members to pay that back over 3 years. So endowments are critical to the life of an established organization. And again, you can look at any organization here in town over 100 years old, they probably have an endowment, all right? So how does one create this endowment? Usually it's done through estate gifts. In other words, people at the end of their life say, I'm going to provide some of my resources to go to this endowment. And there's two ways to get there, the hard way and the easy way. The hard way is if you have a trust, amending your trust. If you have a will, putting that language in your will. Because probably that means you're going to have to go to an attorney. They're going to charge you to do an amendment that says this charity or these charities receive this amount of money. Necessary, but it's a little bit hard and a little bit expensive. There is also, oh, by the way, if you don't have a will is something you can do yourself. LegalZoom.com. $89. About a half hour of your time, answer the questions, hit print, sign it, you're done. If you don't have a safety deposit box, put it in a vegetable crisper, a baggie, in the vegetable crisper of your refrigerator, because if your house burns down with you in it, guess what survives? Your refrigerator. Someone's going to pull open that door. That's a horrible place to put your will. But the point is, it doesn't have to be complex. And yes, if you pass away without a will, your estate goes through the laws of intestate, and it's probated, and it's a disaster. And you lived through that, and thanks for sharing that story. Okay, so the hard way to get there is amending your will, amending your trust. Then what's the easy way? Think about if you have an IRA account, or a life insurance policy, or an annuity, what directs where those assets go? It's called the beneficiary designation, right? And typically, you name your spouse as the primary, and typically your kids as the contingent. Do you have to name your spouse and only your spouse as the primary? No. You can name a charity and my spouse, or if you're a widow or widower, can you name, instead of just my kids, can you name these 3 charities and my 3 kids? Of course you can. And that beneficiary designation, I started to bring one because it's a form that big, is revocable, meaning you can change it. So just like if your kids don't treat you well, you can remove one of them. If those charities don't treat you well, guess what? You can change it. It's revocable. Lovely, lovely older gentleman who'd been involved in the community for decades, across the street, church across the street. When he passed, he was on his 9th amendment, slowly eliminating the charities one by one that forgot about him. Okay? So the point is, it's not cast in stone. And so my bullet point there, beneficiary designations on IRAs, life insurance, and annuities, that's the simplest and easiest way. Call up the agent, broker, whatever, and say, I'd like to include these charities or this charity in my IRA designation, along with my spouse, my kids, my family, whatever. The next bullet point says adding a TOD or POD to bank or brokerage accounts. What a beneficiary designation is to the IRA, annuity, etc., a POD or a TOD form, TOD stands for transfer on death, POD stands for payable on death. Financial institutions use those terms interchangeably. You can go down to the bank and you say, can I add a POD or TOD to my form? It's going to look exactly like the IRA beneficiary. Primary, and it can be multiple. Contingent, and it can be multiple. And the reason you want to do that is because if you pass and that checking or savings account is in your name only, it goes through probate, exactly what Craig just described. So by attaching the POD or TOD to your bank or brokerage accounts, that avoids probate. So wait, if my IRA, my life insurance, my annuities, my bank accounts, my brokerage accounts all have these beneficiary designations or PODs, I don't have anything that will be probated. Wrong. Your house. Your house will go through probate unless you have a trust, which we'll talk about in a moment. Okay? So far, so good? So those are the simple ways to include a charity in your estate planning. The next bullet point, I put typical estate and distribution example. So January will start my 38th year doing what I do for a living. So I've seen a few cases. And here's a classic case, and I serve on many boards. This is a classic case of the kind of estate that's distributed to a nonprofit here. Widow owns a house, paid off, because that's the way the Greatest Generation did things. Thank you very much. House is paid off, and they have a bank or brokerage account or IRA worth a couple $100,000. They don't feel wealthy. They don't look wealthy. They don't act wealthy. Because all I have is my house here in Redlands and my couple or $300,000 in these accounts. Well, guess what? You're probably worth about $1 million because a home in Redlands is worth $600,000 to $700,000 plus this couple $300,000 account. And so, typically speaking, when the kids inherit this, they're in their 60s. They've already saved. They're probably doing fine. And the most common message I hear from the kids is, I wish mom and dad would have spent more of this money on themselves. Because if indeed your estate is worth $900,000 and it's going to 3 kids, that means each kid's going to get $300,000. And here's what happens after they've said they wish mom and dad would have spent more of it. They take a cruise, they redo their kitchen. I'm serious. And they put the other $230,000 in their bank account, brokerage account, whatever. So each kid got $300,000, $230,000 was left that they put. Okay, what if you named a charity or charities for just 10% of your estate? Instead of getting $300,000, they'd get $270,000. Would they still go on the cruise? Yes. Would they still do their kitchen? Yes. And instead of $230,000 being left over, there'd be $200,000 left over. And now the charity has a nice gift. Why is that important? Claremont McKenna College, struggling financial institution to the west of us, right? Been around a long time. Article in the LA Times, October 2nd of this year, talked about that they had just completed a $1.1 billion fundraise for their endowment. $1.1 billion. But here's what was fascinating to me, and I'm going to read it from the article. How many donors do you think? A billion is 1,000 millions, okay? So one would think they got a lot of $1 million gifts. No. More than 12,000 donors contributed to the campaign, representing about 2/3 of the alumni. The median gift, in other words, if you took all the gifts and lined them up, the median gift was, guess how much? Go ahead, take a guess. 10 million, a million, 1,000, 10,000, 220. $220 was the average gift. $220. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? 12,000 people gave small amounts of money. Do you know how many of those 12,000 donors gave $1 million or more? 89. That's all. So, obviously, Claremont McKenna is a very sophisticated fundraising organization. They've been around a long time. But the idea of giving small amounts of money in your estate planning to build up the endowment, that's really what I'm talking about today. Okay? We're going to move on from endowments to a little bit of tax planning. If you have an IRA, and I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, and if you're over age 72, you have to take money out of your IRA. It's called a required minimum distribution. And again, most of my clients, especially in their 80s or some in their 90s, they hate it. It's like, why are you sending me this? I have to pay taxes on it. I can't spend it and enjoy it. It's an IRS rule. Okay. Did you know that you can take that RMD and give it straight to charity? It doesn't come to you. You tell the custodian of the IRA, I want you to send this to the charity. That's called a QCD, Qualified Charitable Distribution. Why is that important? Because if you don't itemize your taxes, you're not getting the benefit of your charitable contribution. Okay, slow down, Neil. What does that mean? And I'll use some numbers. My wife said don't use a lot of numbers, but I'm going to have to on this example. Let's say you're married and your income is $75,000 total, of which $5,000 is this required minimum distribution, and you don't itemize. You get the standard deduction. I'm going to round this off to $25,000. So $75,000 comes in, of which 5 was the IRA. You automatically get 25 of deduction. You pay tax on 50. What if I took my 5,000 of IRA and send it straight to charities? Now my income's not 75, it's 70. And I still get my $25,000 deduction. So now I'm taxed on 45,000, not 50. For a single person, I'll do it this way. 50,000 of income, about 15,000 is the standard deduction. You're paying tax on 35. Again, if that part of that 50 is 5,000 of IRA, give it straight to the charities, protect your cash. Now you're taxed not on 35,000 but 30. Okay? And so you reach out to, again, your broker, whoever the custodian of your IRA is, and you literally present them the names and addresses of the charities of your choice, and they cut the checks to those charities. They'll send it to you, and you can deliver it to the charity. But that's a very simple way to give money from your IRA and get the benefit of the tax deduction, which you may not. All right, last piece, trusts. As Craig said, the primary reason for a trust is to avoid probate. What's probate? Probate is the court process with statutory fees attached that clears title to your account, meaning there's no debts against your house or there's no claims against other assets. And it's expensive. It's expensive. For a $200,000 account, the probate will be about $8,000. The account is tied up for months. If it's a personal piece of real estate, the kids can't sell it, they can't list it, they can't do anything to it. You're paying on that $600,000 residence, you're going to pay about $30,000 to $35,000 of statutory fees for the kids to wait to get this house. So yes, a revocable living trust is a good thing, especially for real estate. If you are very close to your kids and you love your kids, you can have your real estate owned joint tenants with rights of survivorship. So when my parents bought the condo down here 22 years ago. On title is actually Joyce, me, mom, dad. Whoever passes first or second, it automatically reverts to the surviving party, right? That's another way to avoid probate without using a trust. The other reason that people use trusts is to control assets. You may love your daughter, but your daughter married a jerk. And you absolutely do not want, right? Or you have a grandkid who was a wonderful little person, but as they got older, they started making bad decisions and got bad habits. So if you're trying to control assets from the grave, that's the way to do it, is with a revocable living trust. But the primary purpose of the trust is to avoid probate. What's a trust? Think of a boat, right? Do you have an image of a boat in your mind? The builder of the boat is you. That's called the grantor. The driver of the boat is the trustee. Can a boat have two drivers? Sure. That's co-trustees. So when mom and dad are alive, they're both trustees. Dad passes first, as Craig said. The surviving spouse is now the driver of the boat. But you may say, I don't really like driving the boat all by myself. Therefore, I would like to name the next driver of the boat, that's called the successor trustee, and have them come alongside and drive the boat with me. So now you're co-trustees again, adult parent, adult child. Or you could just say, I'm done driving the boat. Son, it's yours. So you resign as trustee, adult child steps in, and they drive the boat. So you see how a document, this boat, was created by you, the grantor. You're the driver of the boat, and you've named drivers of the boat going forward. Last piece of my analogy, the boat has to go where you said it's going. So in your document, kind of like your will, it says who gets my stuff. The trust is going to say who gets my stuff, and the driver of the boat can't change that. So just because you named your adult son to be the trustee, he doesn't get to go down the list and say, I really never liked that charity. I really don't like Aunt Jim. They don't get to change it. They must drive the boat to the destination that you put down. Okay? So that's why people use a revocable living trust. Back to the beginning. If you have beneficiary designations and PODs and TODs on your financial assets, the only asset you're probably going to have probated is your house. You can get around that by titling it as joint tenants, which there's some dangers to doing that I won't get into. Okay. Did I throw enough at you? 3 things we talked about. Endowments. Why do they exist? Mature organizations want to save for the future. Is it hard to give to an endowment? No. You can do it through beneficiary designations. Yes, you can amend your will or trust. Tax planning advice. Can you give your money straight to charity from your IRA and receive the tax deduction potentially that you're not right now? And then last, the boat trust idea to avoid probate. Okay? I'm going to hand this back to Craig, and I think we're going to open it up for Q&A.
I'm glad you did. I was getting a little seasick there towards the end. Okay, what questions do you have? I'll bring the microphone to you so people can hear your questions.
In your example of the like the IRA, and so that you mentioned 5,000, is it the whole 5,000, or you could say no, 1,000 of the 5,000?
Yeah, absolutely. You can divide it up however you wish. Yes. We just processed a distribution that was nearly 20 charities long. Yeah, 500 here, 1,000 there, 15,000 here, and there is a limit on the upper end to $100,000. So if your required minimum distribution is 150,000, you can only QCD 100 of it. So there's an upper limit.
I have a trust, but it's been done about 12 years ago. Do trusts have to be renewed or re-looked at every 5 years or so? And also, are there laws in California that change within the trust stuff that really need to be looked at?
That's a great question that comes up all the time. And here's the right response. If all the people that you named, remember I talked about the successor trustees and the beneficiaries, if all those relationships are the same, you probably don't need to amend your trust, because the financial side of the trust, that how much goes into this Q-tip trust or this or that doesn't change. Or if it has, it's gotten more generous to people. So if those relationships and people that you named haven't changed, you're probably fine. But if, again, you want someone else to be the successor trustee, then yes, that's an amendment.
One more question. I added a checking account to a savings account. The savings account is in the trust. The bank was having a terrible time trying to add a checking account that perhaps wasn't in the trust or something. Eventually, I think they did. But is that a liability? How, if you have a checking account that's not in the trust, how does that work?
Excellent question again. So what you want to do is have a second signer, typically it's one of the adult kids, on your checking account. And the checking account is in your name, it's not in the trust. Why is that going to avoid probate? Because you don't have a lot of money in your checking account. Your savings account can or should be owned by your trust, or as I just described, have it POD'd or TITO'd to your trust. Now it's avoided probate. Because oftentimes people walk into the bank and they say, here's my trust, I want to add my kid to the account. And they say, no, unless your kid is a co-trustee, that doesn't work. So have the account owned by you, add the kid, and add the POD or TOD to your trust. That make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Neil, we want to thank you for making a complicated subject easy to understand. Never did understand finances myself, and I've always used a financial planner. And when we were young, we were unable to save any money. There just wasn't any money left to save. We got married. We didn't go out and buy new furniture. We went to garage sales and bought furniture, and we decorated the living room in, I guess you'd have to say it was early Truman was the style of furniture that we got. But what we found we could do, since my mother was a realtor, is we could go in with her on buying houses, fixer-uppers, and I would fix them up, and then we could turn them over and sell them. And that's how we saved money. It wasn't to just putting it aside. We couldn't. There wasn't any money left at the end of the month to put aside. So you find some way when you're young to do that, and then when you're our age, then you benefit from those equity investments. But it is so wise to make plans. And I just think that that's incumbent with gray hair. You have to make plans for the future. If there are people in the world that you still love, then you need to make plans for them. All right, this is your last chance for a question. Otherwise, we will see you in December. I think it's like, what, the 10th of December, maybe? It's something like that. And we'll be doing a wrap-up on aging and looking at, in the light of all that we learned about aging, and particularly in light of the losses that we suffer in aging, how do we go forward? How can we go forward with such a depressing topic as aging? And I am going to place within your hands the answer. And it's a book. And you're going to take it home, and it's a gift. And I bought them on the internet. I got 35 copies of this book, so I hope we can scare up 35 people to take them off my hands, and they're free. So that'll give you the answer. The answer to how we should then live in aging in the light of these losses. It's a wonderful answer, and you'll be so glad that you got the book. Thank you for coming.